Hello and welcome to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Over the next 60 minutes, I'll be bringing some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage here on our station. This week, we hear all about the new Austrian coalition.
In the run-up to the elections, Austrian Chancellor and People's Party leader Karl Nehammer admitted that the political establishment had been left playing catch-up.
Plus, we talk with film director Steve McQueen on his new film, Blitz.
My experiences in Iraq, being, actually in a war zone, I wanted to bring that to a situation which was much more familiar to people like myself, which will be at home in London, in the UK.
All that and much more in the next hour here on The Curator with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. And we start the show indeed with Steve McQueen. It was a pleasure meeting him, the Oscar-winning filmmaker. He's known for his in-depth human exploration of characters and history, which is executed with an artist's eye. We spoke to McQueen about the release of his new film, Blitz, which details the lives of 20th century Britons during the Second World War.
Why can't you come with me?
Sweetheart, I told you it's an adventure for children only. Grown-ups not allowed. But it's going to be great. You're going to make new friends.
My friends already are.
Yeah, well, you play games in the countryside. That'd be nice. There'll be cows and there'll be horses.
But they smell. I want to stay with you.
Yeah, I know. It's only until all this is over. And then the schools will open again and life will get back to normal, I promise.
Please, Mum. Don't send me away.
Defiance against the Nazis, I think that was everyone's takeaway. Again, defiance against sort of tyranny in a way. Step up a lip, keep calm and carry on situation. Again, during my research, you sort of dig some shallow digging and you find out it was slightly different. I mean, there's the front of what that is, but also there's the reality of actually what was happening.
That's precisely what I also like in the film, because, this kind of stiff upper lip attitude. But the UK, the situation was not very rosy as well. It was not everyone in it together. There was a lot of that. But it was also a difficult time. There were kind of racism. Society was not as rosy and united as some people make us think.
No, it wasn't. I mean, again, my picture, I wanted to bring the reality of the environment as well, as much as, again, as I said before, as much as one was fighting the enemy, which was the Nazis, we were fighting ourselves again. I mean, lots of things were embedded within this narrative in sense a way of the actual narrative of the times that people lived in, which through colonialism and so forth.
But at the same time, let's talk about something positive. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when Rita...
Oh, this is all positive.
Oh yeah, this is all positive.
The truth is always positive.
Oh yes, I agree with you. When Rita is dancing with her partner in a club, I mean, this is such a vivacious scene. That was beautiful and brought some color to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I mean, this is the reality of what was going on actually during the 30s, because there's obviously a little time before the actual, in the scene is a little bit of time before the Blitz. There was, like I said, there were lots of black clubs in central London and so forth. So yeah, things were happening. There was a lot of people who were mixing, a lot of people who were sort of, being introduced to each other. There was a liberation within sexuality and whatnot. So yeah, a lot of things were going on, absolutely.
I'm curious about your kind of initial ideas for the film, or when you start having the idea to do a film like this. Was it perhaps your experience in Iraq as well? Did give you some sort of knowledge about people in situation of war?
That's right. That was a starting point, because majority of people in the world imagine how they experience war is through the media, and it's very abstract. Of course, it's sort of normally very graphic. It's however you receive your news on your phone, or your computer, on a television, or a newspaper. It's very sort of, again, abstract. It's not sort of seen as something which is real as such. And I wanted to sort of, my experiences in Iraq, being, actually in a war zone, I wanted to bring that to a situation which was much more, obviously more familiar to people like myself, which will be at home in London, in the UK.
I want to talk about the cast, because Elliot Heffernan playing George, I mean, what a revelation. How was it the process to cast the character? Well, let's be honest, he's central to the film. I mean, he's... Difficult.
I mean, you write the script and all of a sudden, oh my goodness gracious. That's not so bad. Oh my God. Well, does George exist? Does this character, does this person exist? myself and the casting director Nina Gold through our net, broad and wide, open audition. And then there was George through Elliot Hufferman, and then he was just incredible. I mean, there was a stillness to him. He was almost like a silent movie star in a way. The way he was, the way he acted, you wanted to engage with his face, his huge eyes. And again, it was just one of those, there's a magnetism to him, and that was it. And yeah, it was incredible. He's never acted before, he's not an actor.
That's crazy. Talking about George, the character, is it true that you've seen a picture of a young boy from the period? That's fascinating because, of course, the film is based on true events, but you had to imagine a George in your head, right? Was that picture the inspiration for George?
That was the starting point in some ways, of course, after being the war artist. I wanted to make a picture about the war during that time. As soon as I saw that photograph, I thought that was my way, and basically it was a photograph of a young black child, mixed race child, obviously had one parent black, white, one parent black, standing at a railway station waiting to be evacuated. And I thought, he was my in. Seeing war through a child's eyes.
I mean, the cast of the film is superb. Of course, Saoirse Ronan, I mean, what an amazing role she played. But one, Benjamin Clementine as Ife, I mean, what a dignified character. I think he's one of my favorite characters. Fantastic, and I think because
he's a good character.
He's a good. Was he based on someone from real life?
Yeah, I mean, look, he's based on someone called Ite Epion, who was an actual air warden, but previously before that, he was a law student, and when war broke out, he became an air warden. He signed up, and he's based on real characters. There's a speech in the film where he talks about race and how people are trying to divide us, which is actually a real speech he gave in the air raid shelter. Because again, it was just one of those things where doing the research brought up so many interesting people and situations that I thought we could incorporate into our picture. But these situations, these characters had to serve the story, which was a story of Rita and George trying to reunite with his family.
And there are a lot of elements to the film. Of course, there's this beautiful adventure section when George goes in his train journey, he meets new friends, but there's a little bit of horror that's seen at Café de Paris. I mean, that's quite haunting in a way. How was it quite hard to do that scene, especially with George, a child, doing that?
No, it's actually quite fun, actually. I mean, you got to keep it light in order to do those harder things. Again, you got to keep it light, and again, it's all about what you capture on camera. And it is a horrendous scene, but again, when you keep it light, things become more real in a way. Yeah, if you put the weight on it, it becomes too gravitational. And when you keep it light, you bring, as in the process, where things become much more actual. So that was very important, how you direct that and how you balance that with him. Because again, as a child, being confronted with death is a difficult situation.
Another scene that really impressed me is the beginning, the initial scene with the hose. I mean, it's powerful. It's a very important beginning of the film. What did you want to show with that kind of hose? Because it's really, it looked like, I think I read in a critic said that it looked like a monster in a way, that hose.
Yeah, I suppose it's a monster inside us. Well, look, again, I think there's consequences of war. I mean, again, if I wanted to get into the picture immediately, because this title of Blitz, okay, let's get into it. But as much as, again, as I said before, as much as we're fighting our enemies, we're fighting ourselves. In some ways, the hose becomes almost like a metaphor to that, chaos and that sort of situation where we are not even in control of ourselves as far as fighting our enemies, fighting ourselves rather than anything else.
And to Austria next, where after several rounds of talks, Chancellor Karl Nehammer has proposed a coalition between the OVP, SPO and NEO's parties. It will be the first time that Austria forms a three-party coalition, with the move excluding the far-right Freedom Party that gained the most votes in September's federal elections. Monocle's Vienna correspondent Alexei Korolyov has more on this story.
Coalition building is an unhurried business, especially in Austria where people prefer things slow and steady. It's been weeks now since the parliamentary elections, and the news agenda has shifted to other things, most recently Russia cutting off Austrian gas supplies. At first, though, there was shock. The far-right Freedom Party, founded by former Nazis after the Second World War, victorious at the polls. Its leader, Herbert Kickl, vowing to become a Volkskanzler, a people's chancellor, the phrase once used to describe Hitler.
Wir haben das verinnerlicht, wir fühlen uns bestärkt und wir werden von diesem Weg auch nicht abgehen.
That September evening, I found myself at the post-election party of the Social Democrats. They had finished a disappointing third, but despite the somber mood, there were drinks and music. At one point, Elton John's Rocket Man came on.
And I'm gonna be high.
In a strange way, the lyrics seemed to hit the mark. Both the Social Democrats and the second-place People's Party now appeared to be drifting in outer space, untethered.
I miss the earth so much. I miss my wife. It's lonely out in space.
In the run-up to the elections, Austrian Chancellor and People's Party leader Karl Nehammer admitted that the political establishment had been left playing catch-up. And in those first days after the vote, it really did seem as though the Freedom Party might head the government for the first time in modern Austrian history.
And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the...
But it was not to be.
Also, Österreich braucht eine handlungsfähige, eine stabile, eine integre Regierung. Bei der Nationalratswahl am 29. September handelte es sich nicht ein Rennen.
Once again, Austria's President Alexander van der Bellen stepped in as the voice of reason. Using one of his few real powers, he announced he would hand the mandate to form a government to Chancellor Nehammer instead. And tomorrow, Nehammer's People's Party will begin formal coalition talks with the Social Democrats and the Liberal Neos Party to form what's going to be Austria's first ever three-party coalition. For now, at least, it seems Austria's establishment politics has come back down to earth. But staying grounded won't be easy. Between them, the three parties have a wealth of political experience, especially the Social Democrats, who built Austria's welfare state and social housing system. But they'll still need to play catch-up, though this time it's with the economy, not the far right. While inflation has settled, industrial and labor groups are now growing worried about the drop in production and the risk of a deeper recession. The cut-off of cheap Russian gas won't help either. So can these three parties, brought together more by their opposition to the far right than anything else, really find a way to work together? Austria has been given a rare chance to avoid extremism. It mustn't waste it. For Monocle in Vienna, I'm Alexei Korolev.
You are listening to The Curator here on Monocle Radio. And now a highlight from the Foreign Desk. Following Trump's first cabinet appointments, we consider what his second term might mean for tensions between international powers. Andrew Muller speaks with Amy McKinnon, national security reporter for Foreign Policy.
A word that people often use to describe Trump's foreign policy is that it's unpredictable. And he certainly is unpredictable in style and how he conducts his foreign policy and some of his personnel choices. But if you look at what Trump has said over the years, and some of these views go back decades, there are a couple of core things which I think run to, which are very deeply held personal views on foreign policy. One is a real fear of nuclear weapons and the prospect of a nuclear war. I think that is in some ways generational and is one of the things he actually shares with Biden. You know, they remember the Cold War. They remember the nuclear drills. And this is something that Trump has spoken about for decades. You know, and I think it's why he's wary about the prospect of a confrontation with a nuclear power state such as Russia or China and Iran's development of nuclear weapons. The second is, you know, he runs his foreign policy. In many ways, he ran the White House like a family business. So he's very transactional in how he conducts things. If you read The Art of the Deal, you know, a lot of his very bombastic statements, such as threatening to unleash fire and fury against North Korea, people who know the president-elect will say this is part of his bargaining style. This is him trying to get leverage over his negotiating partner. Then I think a third part which follows on from this is, in this transactional approach, he finds it easier to do business in many ways with authoritarian regimes and with these strongman leaders, because when you're not dealing with a democracy, you don't have to worry about a lengthy government policy review process. It's the leader can just wave his hand and get things done. You know, I think to Trump, it seems a quicker and a more efficient approach. So there are some consistencies in his foreign policy. Now, where things become a little bit more unpredictable is in how he executes it and who he chooses for these policy positions, and things like, you know, the the late night tweets that we're now expecting to come out on his foreign policy.
Well, one of the things we want to look at in this episode is what we can glean from some of the choices he has made in terms of staff, and bearing in mind, of course, that these people all still do, in theory, need to be confirmed by the Senate. But let's look at the big one first. His Secretary of State, Senator Marco Rubio, in some respects a relatively orthodox choice. You could imagine that another Republican president might nominate somebody like Rubio. But also quite a surprising one, given the amount of unpleasant things they have had to say about each other in the past. All of that considered, does Rubio strike you as somebody who Trump is going to allow to have much freedom to operate, or is he just there to provide cover for some of the more eccentric cabinet choices?
That's a good question. I mean, I think there was actually some disappointment in the corners of the kind of Make America Great Again wing of the party in Trump's selection of Rubio, because he's seen in a lot of ways of being a hawk. There's been this real evolution, almost kind of 180 switch in parts of the party over the past 20 years, going from, the quote unquote forever wars of the George Bush administration's wars in Iraq and Afghanistan to now a real rejection of that, a real sense that, America should not be fighting these open-ended wars, should not be wading into conflicts overseas because of the immense toll that it has taken on troops and veterans, which make up a large part of Trump's supporter base. And I think there is concern amongst those wings of the party that Rubio is a hawk of the old school. And in some sense, he was a pretty classic conservative on foreign policy, but he has also tacked, like many members of the party, he has tacked his views closer to Donald Trump and closer to the MAGA wing of the party in recent years. Now, whether that's because Marco Rubio has had his own kind of natural evolution in his thinking, or whether that's just him moving to where the party is, I think that's going to be one of the potential points of tension to watch out for in the coming months.
I mean, when we talk about Rubio as a hawk, though, how hawkish is he exactly on, I guess, the two big ones that Republicans have traditionally been hawkish on, i.e. Russia and China?
He's hawkish across the board, and I think particularly on Iran, but most prominently on China. I mean, this is one of the real through lines of, I think, all of Trump's picks for his foreign policy roles in the cabinet, is that they are real China hawks. Now, are they the most hawkish on China? There was some reporting in the Wall Street Journal this week that actually Beijing is slightly relieved because figures like Mike Pompeo, who may be the hawkiest of the hawks, has not yet gotten a role in this administration, and Trump has actually ruled out Pompeo having a role in this administration. But I mean, clearly he is gearing up for a very intense and continued competition with China.
I mean, what we're doing in this episode, I guess, is trying to see how the rest of the world should perceive what we understand of the second Trump administration, and certainly what Trump wants the second administration to look like. So we should consider a couple of the cabinet nominees with foreign policy ramifications which have caused eyebrows to arch, to understate matters wildly. First of all, Peter Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, a Fox News host who occasionally pops up on people's social media feeds, flexing his tattoos and making unnecessarily aggressive pitches for extremely macho soap.
I think there was a real rush for everybody on, was it Tuesday evening? I forget when Hegseth's nomination was announced, to quickly Google who is Pete Hegseth, including members of the Armed Services Committees and Capitol Hill. I mean, Hegseth is a military veteran. He served in the Army National Guard for 20 years. He did deploy to Iraq and Afghanistan. He has a number of medals for his service, but he has never led a large organization. I think the largest organizations he's led have been kind of small veterans, NGOs. As you mentioned, he is a Fox News host. But I think his primary qualification and why Trump selected him for this role is Hegseth has been very outspoken about efforts in the military to improve diversity and equity and inclusion efforts. He's been very critical of women serving in combat roles. So I think Trump sees Hegseth as a culture warrior who can carry out his agenda for the Pentagon, where he's spoken about firing, quote unquote, the woke generals and tamping down on these efforts to diversify the force.
Next up, a legend in the worlds of fashion and millinery. Natalie Teodosi, Monocle's fashion director and the host of our new podcast, Monocle Fashion, spoke to Stephen Jones ahead of the opening of the exhibition Stephen Jones, Chapeau d'Artiste, at Palais Galliera in Paris. The exhibition, which runs from now until March 2025, is a tale of two cities exploring his life and work in both London and Paris, working with everyone from King Jones at Dior to John Galliano at Maison Margiela, and Ray Cavacubo at Comme des Garçons.
I mean, I was definitely a club kid, and I, was one of the Blitz kids, as they talk about, and there's going to be the big exhibition next year at the Design Museum. And I was a few years older than many of the club kids at the time, I mean, only like 3 years older or something. So I was really trying to make a business at the same time as going out and partying all night. But I had sort of one eye on Paris, but it wasn't the Paris, contemporary Paris. I loved this myth of Paris when I just had discovered in St. Martin's School of Art these books of old Vogues and Harper's Bazaar. And there were all these photographs by Henry Clark and Penn and Avedon and these models with like very arch attitudes. I thought that was wonderful, and it sort of reminded me of punk. But what was it like? It was mad. It's funny as well that economically, we never really talked about money. Money was a dirty word. If you were perceived as doing something for money, that would be the end of you, because you were supposed to be doing it for the beauty of creativity, not for the money. So I came out of St. Martin's, and Steve Strange, who ran the Blitz Club, who was the lead singer of Visage, Fade Great fame, which is still continuing, he had a day job too in a shop called PX in Covent Garden. They just moved to a new location, and he asked them if I could have the basement of their shop as a little hat shop. And on the 1st of October 1980, less than a year of leaving college, I opened up my own little shop. And that was incredible. And that's how the shop happened. And what really was a success from day one. We had everybody. We had Anna Piaggi came, Divine came, the wife of the governor of the Bank of England came. We had a few ladies of the street. They came, paid cash, bought the most expensive hats. Really, everybody. And that was the wonderful thing. It was quite democratic.
And we should talk about Paris, of course, as well. Like you said, you mentioned earlier, you've always kept an eye on Paris, and you were such a big part of London and British culture and punk. But tell me about, when did that relationship start with Paris, and when did you start traveling back and forth and working with the fashion houses there?
Well, I first started sort of knowing about Paris, really, probably when I was a teenager, and I'd met I was on holiday with my parents in Italy, and we met some French people, and I came to Paris to learn how to speak French. But I didn't particularly get on with their two sons, but the mother took me literally around every museum in Paris. Every day we would go to a different museum. So I had this sort of avalanche of French culture into my brain, age 15, 16, 17. So that was really the start of it. But after it being a couple of years, I was successful in the shop, but I didn't have very much of a media presence. Certainly, in new magazines like The Face, ID, Blitz magazine, who are really our magazines. Yes, I got press and publicity in that, but the established magazines like Vogue and Harper's and Tatler, etc., absolutely were not interested in me, because they thought that I was too sort of alternative or ridiculous and didn't fit into their idea of what fashion was. But people said to me, well, your hats are more French, you'd be more of a success in Paris. So that had always been on the horizon. But really, my big break over there was through Jean-Paul Gaultier, because he used to come to the clubs in London. I'd met him. And in fact, I was in the Culture Club video of Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? And in that video, I'm wearing a 3-piece suit and a fez, and that corresponded to the look he was going to do for his next men's collection. And he invited me to design women's hats for his collection. I mean, I had no idea. I wasn't going over there to sell hats, but he wanted part of me. And I continued to work with him for quite a few years.
That's so interesting. And do you find that that has also informed the way that you approach design, that tale of the two cities?
I think it has done, because for me, because I'm 67 years old. When I was growing up, the mystique of a hat was always a Parisian hat. It was never a British hat. However, I do concede that around the world now everybody thinks that hats are British, which is largely because of the late Majesty Queen II, and various social reasons and horse racing and ceremonies and things like that. People think hats are British. But for me, I love the idea of the Parisian in a hat and that myth of glamour, je ne sais quoi, which I put in my hats, and then I make it lighter with hopefully British wit and lightness.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
You are listening to The Curator, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. At last year's Leipzig Book Fair, the Most Beautiful Book in the World award, yes, there is such a thing, was won by a small specialist imprint based in Copenhagen. Our correspondent Michael Booth went along to meet its publisher, Christopher Weiss, of the Danish Architectural Press, to hear how you go about creating the most beautiful book in the world, whether the award affected sales, and how he sees the future of design publishing.
Christopher, we're sitting in this beautiful, almost Parisian style, I guess it's end of the 19th century apartment block in the royal quarter of Copenhagen. Shouldn't we be in some kind of like rammed earth building made out of mycelium and glass? Does this building represent what you represent as an architectural publisher?
Well, actually, this is a super interesting part of the city. Traditionally, we've actually published a lot of books on architectural history. So it's part of our DNA, not only to deal with contemporary topics and agendas, but also architectural history. And this is a really interesting house because, as you may have noticed, it's packed with design studios, magazines, all kinds of furniture companies, etc. So,
tell me about the publishing house. How old is it, and what's its journey been over those years?
Well, it's actually a foundation established in 1949 by the Danish Architectural Association to promote architecture and design. We are a non-profit foundation, meaning that we have to represent the more research-based, narrower topics and sort of books for a wider audience. So basically, when I curate our portfolio of projects, I'm very aware that we represent books, authors, topics that might not see the day of light if we didn't publish it.
And what about the language split? How much is Danish language? Do you publish much English language?
I decided early on that, and I could see that we have a global audience. I mean, Danish Nordic architecture Danish design is a global phenomenon, basically. And I think some of the topics that we're dealing with now, for instance, sea level rise and other topics related to the climate crisis, is obviously not a Danish phenomenon. We're part of a larger world. Academic networks, architects, designers from all over the world are trying to find a way through the crisis. And so we help publish books on these topics, and that's way beyond a Danish context.
And I mean, talking about climate crisis and rising sea levels, your kind of standout book from last year, which won the most beautiful book in the world title at the Leipzig Book Fair, was called Critical Coast and was the book of the Danish entry at the Venice Biennale. Tell me about that. How do you create the most beautiful book in the world?
Well, that's a good question. And I believe that you should really spend a lot of time and energy finding people who are way better than you are. And then giving them, and this is a very important point to me, creative freedom. So once you've found these talents, in this case Alexis Mark,
which is just point, isn't one person, it's a trio, a collective, graphic design collective.
Yeah, both educated in Copenhagen and at Yale and other places. They're very sort of both based in a Danish tradition, but have a very international outlook. And then you have these fantastic editors doing the book. If you find the right people and give them, as I said, creative freedom, they can create the content, they can create the shape, and sort of help them do, radical design, push them a little bit, saying, we can do more.
And then there's the old adage, never judge a book by its cover. But how much does great design contribute to the sales of the book? Was Critical Coast, did it sell?
Yes, very much so. And of course, the price in Leipzig helped a little bit, but even before that, it was really a book for a new generation. We invest a lot in design. We over-invest in design. And why do we do that? Because it sells, yes and no. I believe it's important in itself to promote a book design culture that's experimental, that is, creative, that's innovative and fun and all that stuff. Because in itself, a book is not just knowledge, it's a cultural product. In some cases, it's even an artwork, I would say. And I just love experimenting with that. And again, finding the right people to do that is sort of very key to what we do here.
And looking ahead to the future, where's it moving? What directions is it going in? What's exciting you about the near future?
Well, 5 years ago, it was kind of dystopian. Or if you go even further back, 10 years ago, you thought sort of the internet would sort of kill the book. But obviously that didn't happen. That means that we're in the world of the tactile, of the objects. And I feel that we are part of a large sort of network, sort of great colleagues where we talk and exchange ideas and meet at fairs, etc. So I think there's still room for the actual book, and sort of the art of bookmaking is sort of, I don't know if it's a renaissance, that's maybe putting it too boldly, but I really feel there's a lot of attention to it. And also younger people who have this digital fatigue, they turn to something tactile and real like the book again. The book still offers that, a refuge for thought. So I'm optimistic.
And our highlight from the Monocle Daily. Between the pandemic and the rise of streaming services, the last few years have been tough for the film industry across the globe. Bucking the trend, however, is Italy, where generous funding has ignited a cinematic boom. This year, however, the industry has been shaken by the government's apparent change of heart. Monocle's Lily Austin details the ups and downs of one of Italy's most important and most contentious sectors.
The Pope is dead. The throne is vacant.
Next week sees the UK release of Conclave, Edward Berger's mystery thriller starring Ralph Fiennes about the election of a new pope. It was shot entirely in Rome, thanks in no small part to the generous incentives offered to filmmakers by the Italian government. But this year the Italian film industry has been on tenterhooks, awaiting the government's long-threatened rollbacks of this legislation. The past decade has seen something of a renaissance for the country's movie making, with numbers of productions not seen since the post-war Hollywood on the Tiber era. Back then, LA studios flocked to Italy to make use of the cheap labour and historical backdrops. Cinecittà, the production studios first founded by Mussolini in 1937 to make propaganda films, got a new lease of life. It was the location for pictures including Roman Holiday, Ben-Hur, and the Fellini flick that came to typify Italian culture, the Dolce Vita.
Marcello, come here! Hurry up!
But by the 1930s, Cinecittà was close to bankruptcy, forcing the government to privatise the studio. And in the years since, its lots have been plagued by fires. So in 2016, Matteo Renzi's centre-left Democratic Party introduced reforms to revive the flailing film industry. 800 million euros was set aside to fund both local and TV productions and 40% tax credits, offered to international projects who shot in Italy. In the years since, both independent and high-profile productions have come to their shores. Everything from The White Lotus to Matteo Garrone's Oscar-shortlisted Io Capitano was made under the scheme. The number of active companies in the film industry grew by 26%, and foreign investment increased by 49%. You could call the second boom Netflix on the Tiber. So what's the problem?
Allora, ci siamo visti qui, erano quasi 2 anni fa?
Enter Giorgia Meloni's right-wing government. Since taking office in 2022, a cultural war has been waged against left-leaning institutions. I want to liberate Italian culture from a system that you can only work in if you are part of a certain political camp, she said. But it seems like Meloni is the one with a certain political camp in mind, at least for senior cultural appointments. Pietrangelo Buttafuoco, arguably Italy's most acclaimed right-wing intellectual, was named president of the Venice Biennale, the institution which oversees cultural events including the Venice Film Festival, sparking fears that the festival would be censored. Buttafuoco declared before his appointment, a home will be given to those who have not had one until now. Last summer, virtually all of the country's top directors, including Luca Guadagnino, the director of Challengers, and Paolo Sorrentino, the director of The Great Beauty, signed a petition protesting the government's takeover of Rome's Centro Sperimentale di Cinematografia, the world's oldest, and still one of the best, film schools, interpreting the move as a violent and crude attempt to impose a new political orthodoxy.
Penso questo, che noi dobbiamo magari ridurre un po' la quantità dei film finanziati col tax credit e aumentare invece la qualità.
Shortly after, the culture minister, Gennaro Sangiuliano, vowed to cut funding, arguing the film industry was awash with cronyism. As a result, this year the industry has been in a state of suspended animation as the reforms were finalised, with local crews out of work as productions go elsewhere. Gladiator 2, for example, finished much of its filming in Malta.
In a tearful interview, Italy's culture minister Gennaro Sangiuliano confessed to having had an affair with influencer Maria Rosaria Boccia.
Then in September, Sangiuliano was embroiled in a scandal with a former lover, which had Italian media agog, until he was finally forced to step down. He was replaced by Alessandro Giuli, who made his name as a highly conservative commentator and was also a member of a far-right youth organisation in his teens. This only exacerbated fears among filmmakers that funding would be restricted to movies that are what Meloni's government considers Italian enough. Here's one director and cinematographer who did not want to be named, speaking to me at this year's Rome Film Festival.
It's like a little bit violent because if we have 100 of millions in cinema, like 50% is on these kind of movies that talk about Italianity. The other is like documentaries, short films, other movies, but a huge part of this economic thing is on the Italianity. So this is a little bit not democratic, but we are living in this period.
But it seems that the panic may have all been for nothing. Now the reforms have been unveiled and the tax credit has been kept at 40%. The only major change has been the introduction of rules around AI, which some think may affect the numbers of Hollywood studios coming to Italy, but on the whole are considered a positive. For example, requiring full transparency about any AI used during production. While making the announcement, Lucia Borgonzoni, Italy's Undersecretary of State to the Ministry of Culture, took the opportunity to criticise media outlets for circulating fake news about the cuts, despite it being her former culture minister who originally claimed he would be slashing funds. Sangiuliano's affair in the summer may have been the film industry's saving grace, or perhaps it was simply down to the numbers. As Borgonzoni noted, between 2016 and 2023, the government funded €878 million in tax credits, which generated over €2.3 billion in investment. While other cultural sectors continue to be plagued by accusations of censorship, it seems that the film industry, for now at least, is safe. Producers have until the end of the year to apply for funding for the reinstated tax credits. For Monocle, I'm Lily Austin.
And we're back here with the curator. And of course, the Monocle, the Entrepreneurs magazine, came out this week and includes an Austria survey. And precisely because of that, I decided to do a very special global countdown looking at some of the best of Austrian pop.
This is, of course, one of those, Faye, that nobody would actually know was Austrian until they hear it and then go, oh, I had no idea.
For some reason, for me, this song represents Europe somehow. You know, I know it's an Austrian song, but I don't know, when I think of Europe in the 80s, I think of that song.
It was an absolute classic.
And it's celebrating 40 years this year. So it was chosen as a theme song for the 2024 European Women's Handball Championship, which is happening in Austria, Hungary and Switzerland.
Amazing. I had not looked into that.
Yes.
I have to follow the Austrian Handball Championship. So European ones in Austria, Hungary, and which one did you say?
And Switzerland,
Switzerland. Yeah. Amazing.
Very exciting.
And great to bring that song back. Love it. 40 years later.
And now we're going to jump to an artist. I told you that I have a close relationship with Austrian pop. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit. But back in 2020, we did another Austrian special for Monocle. And for the culture pages,
I remember that was my first year with Monocle.
Really? That was your first year?
Thrust into an Austria special on the magazine.
Amazing. And I've always been a fan of Wolfram, which is an amazing Austrian DJ. He executive produced one of my favorite albums by Sally Shapiro, Disco Romance. I mean, he's a very cool guy, very fashionable. I love the way he dresses. So I went to Vienna. We had schnitzel together and discussed music and pop and clubbing. And this is one of my favorite tracks from Wolfram. From 2011, it is Out of Control. Let's have a listen. It's very exciting.
Another one I'm assuming people would not necessarily know was Austrian.
Exactly. And I think people should know those things because Austria has an amazing music scene. And Wolfram's a cool guy. He's in all the fashion parties. I think the fashion crowd loves his kind of DJ sets because I think his music is kind of catwalk music, you know? It's very upbeat. I don't know. It made us dance here in the studio.
Do you remember where you had a schnitzel with him?
I don't remember, but it was one of those local places because, of course, he
took you to a good classic local Viennese schnitzel place.
A good classic, and I think we had a really nice chat there.
Where do we go from there, Faye?
This is one of the obvious ones. As you know, and I am an Eurovision fan. I mean,
it had to come. I was waiting. I knew. I thought when you first said 2020 there, I was like, wait a minute, we're jumping all the way ahead. But you picked a 2011 track, so now we're moving to
2014.
Very good.
Which is, of course, the lovely Conchita Wurst winning one of the most historic winning songs from Eurovision. It is Rise Like a Phoenix.
From the fading light of light, rise like a phoenix, out of the ashes seeking rather than vengeance, retribution you were won. Once I'm transformed, once I'm reborn.
I mean,
very special moment.
Close your eyes, it could be a
that.
Bond song, right?
Absolutely could be a Bond song, yes, 100%. I still get goosebumps with that one. I always remember it, and I was at Eurovision the following year in Vienna as a result of that song.
Of course, and let's be honest here, a bearded drag queen, very special because at that time there was a lot of controversy. It did win, but I think a lot of countries, they were kind of rejecting such a song. So well done, Conchita. Back in 2014, a groundbreaking victory, I would say.
Absolutely, and quite a voice. I mean, she belted that out.
Absolutely.
Where are we going then? We have one more. Where are we here? We have one final track. Where do we go from Conchita Wurst and Falco? I mean, what is left?
It's hard to beat, but I think I decided to look at something current. So this song,
one current track.
I love her. She's in the playlist from Monocle Radio. And maybe a little spoiler here. Maybe I shouldn't even mention, but the December January issue will feature an interview I did with her as well because she's part of a special playlist. She's an Austrian-Iranian, very very cool singer. It's kind of new wave, a little bit of electro, but quite dreamy at the same time. It is Sophie Royer with I Forget I'm So Young.
I forget so easily. I forget so easily. I forget so I'm so young. Everything I've ever known. I forget so easily. I forget so easily.
Beautiful. incredible. Sophie is on our playlist. I do announce her songs.
And she's international. She's playing, by the end of the year, she'll be in Berlin, London and Paris as well. So if you're interested to see her live, she's a cool one to keep an eye on. And finally, we're back on familiar soil this week on food neighborhoods, as we head to East London neighborhood of Dalston. This vibrant slice of the capital is renowned for its hole-in-the-wall coffee shops, high-end wine bars, and some of London's most exciting restaurants. Here, Monocle's Hannah Fan shows us her favorite spots.
Dalston is a buzzing neighborhood in East London, sandwiched in between the tranquil areas of Stoke Newington and Islington. Jam-packed with bang-for-your-buck eateries, artisanal bakeries, and plenty of late-night dwellings to dance the night away, the diversity of London's food and drink scene is on display in this lively locale. A stone's throw away from both the Dalston Overground stations is Dusty Knuckle Bakery. A day out in Dalston wouldn't be complete without a trip to this institution. Located in a secluded car park, this bakery serves up some of the best breads and buns in the city. Once inside, there's likely to be a queue, so you'll have plenty of time to decide what pastry to get. You can't go wrong with one of their morning buns, croissant dough rolled in cinnamon sugar. If you're in the mood for something savory, order the egg chili cheese sarnie featuring gooey cheese, a fried egg, and a kick of chili sandwiched between freshly baked focaccia. To quench your thirst, try out one of their rotating matcha options. My pick is the strawberry one. If the weather's nice, snag a seat outside and have a long, leisurely morning. It just so happens one of the best Vietnamese baguette sandwich places in London, Ban, is in Dalston. This little slice of Vietnam in East London is an excellent pit stop for a quick lunch before spending the afternoon browsing the countless thrift shops that line the heart of the area, Kingsland High Street. Grab a classic banh mi, which holds a blend of char siu pork, Vietnamese sausage, and chicken liver pate, balanced out with fresh herbs, mayo, and a hint of chili, all stuffed into a freshly baked baguette. While you're here, make sure to get one of their creamy coconut milk iced coffees to wash it all down. After exploring the area's independent shops, stop by the Dalston Curve Garden for an afternoon respite. This beautiful green space filled with wildflowers, veg patches, and meandering paths is a world away from the crowds of nearby Kingston Road. They stock a wide range of drinks and sweet treats, many produced in East London. So, grab a lemonade to sip on while you smell the flowers. For dinner, join the queue at Mongol One, a bustling no-frills Turkish joint offering up an array of grilled meats. As soon as you enter, you're hit with the smell and sight of their charcoal grill operation. The generous family-style sharing plates are the star of the show. So, make sure to come with a big group and a big appetite. Start off with a cold mixed meze, which features hummus, a spicy tomato spread, and garlicky yogurt paired with fluffy, warm bread. The extensive menu can make it difficult to pick just one main, but I'd suggest opting for the Mongol platter, which offers grilled delights like minced lamb shish kebabs, lamb chops, and chicken wings. Although, if you'd prefer your own entree, I recommend the yogurtlu kuzusis, minced lamb on a decadent bed of bread, yogurt, and tomato sauce. Head to Cozy Bar, 3 Sheets on Kingsland Road for post-dinner drinks and stay a while to sample their inventive cocktail list. For whiskey lovers, get the Hinoki, a Japanese whiskey topped off with black tea, honey, and soda. If you're more inclined to a sweeter tipple, opt for the Raspberry Marg, a twist on the classic cocktail featuring fermented raspberries, chili, and rosé. If you're not ready to call it a night, stop by Ridley Road Market Bar, a late-night venue that always has a lively crowd. With free entry, cheap booze, and great DJs spinning disco and reggae, this is the perfect way to end a day in Dalston. Get a couple ginger mojitos, head to the dance floor, and boogie late into the night.
And that's all we've got time for this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by Jack Jewers and presented by me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Join us again next week, and thank you for listening.